Hey guys, welcome back. I'm recording this late on Saturday night. Hopefully I'll have this published first thing Sunday morning. I just kind of want to break down what the latest news and gossip is surrounding the new Warner Brothers Lord of the Rings series that is believed... I don't even know when it's supposed to be coming out, to be honest. If they just announced it now, we're probably about 3 years away, if not more than that. Especially with all the amount of delays that we've seen coming out. But the long and the short of it, Warner Brothers has announced that there is going to be a new Lord of the Rings movie, or series of movies. To be honest, I haven't even cared to pay that much attention to the story because I know it's going to suck. I know it's going to be bad. I don't even know if it's going to be modernized or woke. At this point, you can assume that it's going to be bad just based on the fact that everything that's either being remade or remastered or re-released now is just not good. But let's get into this article from Forbes. The shadow of the Rings of Power hangs over Warner Bros. New Lord of the Rings movies. And I think this is a very important piece to pay attention to. Anybody who knows anything knows that the Rings of Power show sucked. It was garbage. Now look, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of the Hobbit trilogy. I liked parts of it. I wish they could have kept it down to like one or maybe even two movies at the most, kind of split it in half halfway through the book. That would have been okay in my opinion. But they put a lot of filler in there, a lot of things that kind of ruined the entire story for me, especially after rereading The Hobbit going, oh my god, the movies were ridiculous, okay? Should have been the original trilogy, maybe part one, part two of The Hobbit, I don't know. But trilogy was just beyond ridiculous. Anyways, here we are, not even a full year after the first season The Rings of Power came out. That show has left an awful taste in everyone's mouth regarding what is, being called Lord of the Rings of Power, having nothing to do with Lord of the Rings, having nothing to do with Tolkien, nothing to do with anything that J.R.R. Tolkien ever wrote, because they didn't purchase the rights to anything that he wrote. They purchased the rights to kind of fiddle with the appendix from Return of the King. So here we have Warner Brothers, who has been cutting corners left and right, trying to reduce costs, trying to save money, shelving entire movies that were already filmed because they just didn't want to take the loss of releasing it and having it tank in the movie theaters. And now we have the announcement that there will be another Lord of the Rings movie, or series of movies. The new films come 20 years after the Peter Jackson trilogy made history as one of the greatest cinematic adaptations of all time. Though I had plenty of bones to pick with those films when they released, and I agree, there were some things that they could have changed, but overall, fantastic movies. There are no details beyond this announcement. No directors or actors are attached to the project. No release date is in sight, and yet I feel a terrible sense of dread. And this is articles from Eric Kane, who's done some amazing work over at Forbes. The move comes as Warner Bros. Discovery's CEO David Zaslav has cut costs across the board, canceling shows and movies, and scaling back streaming operations in a massively unpopular, though probably necessary, attempt to climb out of the red and into the black. All the big players are waking up to the realities of a post-spending spree vendor. A new venture into Middle-earth, tapping into that deep well of Tolkien content, comes at its own cost, of course. Embracer Group owns the film rights to Tolkien's work, so Warner has worked out a deal with the Swedish holding company at an undisclosed price. Well, you know that it was expensive. It was probably, it's probably as much or more than what Amazon paid, which cost them... I think the first two seasons of Rings of Power is projected to cost Amazon over $1 billion. So what to make of all this? In purely business terms, Warner Bros. Is almost certainly onto something. Tolkien has never been more popular, the fantasy genre has never been so lucrative, a new foray into Middle-earth will create buzz and hype, and if it's not a total disaster, make a Dragon's Hoard worth of money at the box office. And I'm not so sure about that. I understand what Eric Kane is saying, but I don't think it would generate the amount of revenue that they think it would. I mean, there's no indication that Rings of Power actually created more Amazon Prime memberships, and if anything, they were overwhelmingly negative reviews of the show and a massive drop-off in viewer numbers after episode 2. So that's not a positive sign that another attempt at Lord of the Rings, another shot in the dark, will make any more money for Warner Brothers, who's already been bleeding money left and right. I think that's a little far off base, but we'll continue. As much as I want to be excited for more Lord of the Rings, I can't help but think that mostly it's just a pale shadow compared to the books I fell in love with as a child. Years and years ago, I wrote a piece for The Atlantic wondering when this obsession with adapting fantasy into movies and TVs would wear off, and of course, since then it's just gotten more and more popularized and mainstreamed. And I think a prime example is look at what's gone on with The Witcher, where they cast the perfect man for the role. They cast a guy who loved the story, a guy who had all the information that they could ever need as a backup resource, and they shit all over him and then threw him aside. So The Witcher will not continue past this next season. I would be surprised if they even bother releasing season 4 after Henry Cavill's departure at the end of season 3. Then you have things like The Rings of Power, which was a bastardization and a mockery of Tolkien that did nothing but alienate the fans. So, honestly, I don't know what to make of this. He makes a few points. He says, first, to remake the movies to suit modern times. And this is the thing everyone's worried about, like the hypothetical, what are they going to do to make Lord of the Rings relatable nowadays? He says, the basic story remains the same, but with better special effects and a more diverse cast to appease modern audiences, or rather, modern media critics. Legolas will be a woman, the hobbits will be Harfoots, and so forth. Second, to tap into some other Tolkien stories, such as the Silmarillion. The trick is that it's really a collection of stories and fables and legends that would be extremely difficult to translate to the big screen. Still, it's possible and could actually be quite exciting if done well. Now, if they were just to make a Silmarillion series or a few movies based off some of the stories, like Beren and Luthien or Hurin, I mean, there could be some incredible movies in there. If done with the proper directing, proper cast, proper screenplay, all of that. I'd be excited about an announcement of the Silmarillion. But an announcement of Lord of the Rings, when we've already had the incredible trilogy that is the Lord of the Rings trilogy, where we do not need a remake, the effects are great, the cinematography is amazing, music is fantastic, and the acting is incredible. There's no need for another remake. He says, third, to follow Amazon's example with Rings of Power and just completely ignore the source material altogether, instead creating wildly expensive fan fiction while giving fans the proverbial bird. If you don't like it, you're a bigot. And this I covered many times on my my other channel, about how anybody who didn't like Rings of Power was deemed a racist, a bigot, a homophobe, a transphobe. I mean, all the typical phobes you can throw in there. His article goes on and on. You should go read it for yourself, but I just look at the overall environment that we live in. People don't have that much money. We're headed towards a recession. We're already in a recession, but we're headed towards a legitimate recession in the next coming year, probably give it 6 months. Things have gotten more expensive. We have chemical spills all over the place. People are worried about World War III. We have eggs that are... I just paid $8 for 2 dozen eggs at Costco. We can't afford things. I can't afford to take my whole family to the movie theater. And look at like the recent numbers from the Ant-Man and the Wasp. The drop-off from this has been insane. I mean, Quantumania still has the worst drop for an MCU title. Cocaine Bear still high, now $23 million. And Jesus Revolution raising 15. Now, I'm a fan of Kelsey Grammer, who I believe is in this Jesus Revolution movie. But I'm not rushing off to go see it. I don't know anybody who's seen it. But the fact that Cocaine Bear has already surpassed Ant-Man in the second week that it's been in the theaters is just, it's telling for people's exhaustion for the fantasy and sci-fi genre. I mean, look, I know that fantasy and Marvel are two very different things. Comic books and fantasy do not go hand in hand. But I do think this is a sign that dipping into the well from the same type of source material or the same type of genre that people have been getting burned out on is just going to end in disaster. I mean, if Rings of Power had been movies instead of a show on Amazon that I was already paying for a subscription to, I would not have rushed out to go see those movies based on the trailers that I saw. So it's really hard to compare theater numbers to streaming numbers, but I think culturally, we're all getting burned out on pretty much all of the same regurgitated crap. I mean, look at the live-action remakes of Disney films, where you take the classic Disney film, you spend, millions of dollars adapting it for a modern audience, and it looks nothing like the original cartoon, and it will never be as good. That just is a testament to how good those original cartoons were. On terms of streaming numbers, I mean, look at the Disney Plus report that said that they lost 2.4 million subscribers. Tech industries are laying off thousands of employees around the country, around the world, to be honest. And this number here, where Disney Plus reported that they had a total of 161.8 million subscribers, that number is fake. Yes, they have that many subscribers, but they were spending the first couple of years Disney Plus was a thing, giving away free subscriptions to anybody with an Verizon account. Honestly, they gave away millions of free subscriptions to Disney Plus to make it look like their numbers were better than they were. I guarantee that when all this shakes out and these companies have to make even harder decisions and more layoffs, it's going to come out that they've been lying about their numbers, inflating the numbers just to make their shareholders a little bit happier. And when the shit hits the fan, things are going to be really ugly. And we've seen ugly already, but things are going to get far worse than they are right now. But, I mean, look at these numbers from the original Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogy, which I wasn't even a big fan of. Across the board, I mean, close to $3 billion generated just in the box office alone between those 6 movies. And even though the Hobbit trilogy did have a drop-off, the third movie made less than the second, which made less than the first, whereas the first Lord of the Rings movie made a decent number at $871 million, and then $926, and then 11 or $1.1 billion over here. It's still not. It's not a small number. It's nothing to scoff at. $3 billion across the board for Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. These new movies, if they're not something drastically different, if they are just a modernized remake or a rehashing of the same story that we've already had, that's not as good, that's not authentic to the source material, that isn't faithful to what fans have already come to expect from the Lord of the Rings name, then forget it. It's done. It's going to go nowhere. It's going to cost Warner Brothers more money, and they're just going to have to make more hard decisions down the road. Hopefully they make the right decision, do something that's going to be different, but at this point, who even knows? I have no faith in Hollywood at this point. All right, guys, I will catch you on the next one. Thanks for listening. Take it easy.